Okay, welcome to, I believe it's episode 116 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm here. I'm Eric Eager. I'm by myself today. I'm joined on Mondays and Wednesdays by former Falcons GM and CEO of Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitroff. But yeah, today I'm going to be previewing NFL Week 7. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the goings-on in the NFL. Interestingly, this week we do have some bye weeks, which will be helpful to the cause. Yes, Sean, the doc flying solo. We did last week. I do want to recap a little bit of what we had last week with Steven Ruiz. I had Steven on. Steven and I have had some disagreements in the past about quarterbacks, but I do think that he was being a little bit unfairly harangued for his take on Brock Purdy. Interestingly for Steven, Brock Purdy did not play well on Sunday, although he did make one drive at the end of the game, did not play well against a very good Browns defense. And when it came to Monday Night Football, Steven's, sort of second or third ranked quarterback also didn't play well, which has created a firestorm for the Justin Herbert stands, because apparently whenever he doesn't have a good game, they have to stand to account for all of his sins, even though there are players that a lot of times don't have great games. So that was a little bit of a recap of last week. I talked about some of the games with Thomas Dimitroff on Monday. Go ahead and look at that podcast. We also had Stats and Schemes episode 7 that came out on Tuesday, and then Parker Fleming on Thursday did an interview with ESPN Seth Walder, which I thought was really good. Let's just get on with the previews of the games. I'm going to go ahead and pull up Sumer Sports on Twitter here, just to kind of give you guys a lay of the land from a statistical standpoint for these teams. So here you go with this particular one. This is Buffalo going on the road as about 8.5, 9-point favorites to New England. Now, last week, a lot of sharp people were on New England getting a full field goal against the Las Vegas Raiders. They came back, scored a touchdown. There were some, aided things there. I think a roughing the passer penalty that was particularly beneficial to the Patriots. There was also a, they got the stop, they got the ball back. There was a drop by Devontae Parker. I think many, I'm on sort of both sides of whether or not the Patriots should have actually covered that game, but conditional on getting the ball back down too, I think that there was a pretty high cover probability. But as we know, Max Crosby went ahead and got a half sack in the end zone on Mac Jones, despite being double teamed. And that game not only was over, but also New England failed to cover. They're now 1-5. Their only win, a 5-point win with a safety that actually blew the cover in that game as well against the Jets. When you look at this game, it's a huge mismatch. It's why the Bills are road favorites there. The Bills have basically beaten the Patriots in every single game between the two teams since they got good in 2020, with the exception of a game where there was really bad weather that was played in Orchard Park on a Monday Night Football game, a game where a lot of us had the under, and it wasn't much of a sweat. If you look at Foxborough weather this weekend, I'm just looking at it now. Sunday, we do have, some precipitation, not a ton of wind, actually. I think that people who laid the points with Buffalo here are actually going to luck out at least a little bit. Buffalo struggled on Sunday Night Football against Tyrod Taylor and the New York Giants. I think some of that is just secondary receivers are really having a hard time for them. Stephon Diggs had his customary, double-digit catch, 100-yard game, but they really struggle. Both tight ends have not played to their strengths, and Gabriel Davis has been the up and down player that he has been for the majority of his career. So that game, again, when I think about Buffalo, I picked them to go to the Super Bowl to face Detroit prior to week 1, and I feel pretty good about Detroit. I don't feel as good about Buffalo, but as the figure said, they're still second in EPA per play. Josh Allen is a quarterback. Defensively, even though they're facing some injuries, they're pretty strong. And so I think they take care of business here. I think, if you're thinking about this from a wagering standpoint, I think if you can get them below the 8, the 9, and when we look at different books here, I'm just going to reference our friends at BetStamp here. Actually, this thing has come down. PointsBet has it at 7.5. BetRivers, the biggest number if you want to bet the New England, at 8.5. So this thing is just like a pretty good teaser, like I would say, in addition to being, if you like Buffalo, for example, I make the game about 8.5. To me, it feels like both a good teaser leg, as my former intern and buddy here, Arjun, says, easiest teaser leg of the week. I do believe that. A lot of people are thinking about them in Survivor as well, which is a little tricky just because it's a divisional game on the road, but one that is not a bad look there. When we think about Buffalo, they're still in a battle. I do think there is some value if you look at them in the division markets. You're getting well over even money. I do think the Bills, end up winning that division, which is against market a little bit there. So those are just a couple things to think about with respect to that game. Interestingly, for the Patriots, I'm not sure when or if we see any sort of letting up on the season. If we see trades of players like Jabril Peppers, Josh Uche, some of the wide receivers, it'll be interesting to see, sort of how that ends up going, because I do think that there is a chance that the Patriots kind of call it quits on the year. But at the same time, because there have been reports that Belichick is somewhat of a sitting duck here, do they continue to play hard because of pride and that kind of thing? So that's just something to monitor. They will certainly be playing at full strength this week, except for the injuries. I don't see any let up there. Let's go to Cleveland at Indianapolis here. This thing is actually pushed out quite a bit. Before the Deshaun Watson news that he was playing or practicing fully, and which, again, I think would imply that he's playing, this number was under a field goal. That was with the news that, Anthony Richardson, who is already on IR, he went on, he was going to have season-ending surgery. So we are getting Gardner Minshew for as long as we get Gardner Minshew. But this thing has moved out. You can look at some places. So BetRivers is at -3. The Superbook is at 3.5. So that's kind of the range there. If Deshaun Watson's fully healthy, I think this spread is more in that 4.5-5 range. And so any discrepancies there, to me, is a little bit in the way of, you're not getting Deshaun Watson at full strength. But when I think about that defense, when I think about the fast track that is Indianapolis, with Myles Garrett, Okonkwo, as well as, Zadarius Smith, and when I think about that speed on that front versus Indianapolis against a quarterback that is not particularly physically gifted, I have a hard time seeing Indianapolis being super competitive in this game. You have additionally the fact that Gardner Minshew, for the first time in his career, kind of was putting the ball in harm's way. I don't think that the receivers for the Colts have been particularly threatening to opposing defenses. So to me, this is an Indianapolis or nothing type of situation. I think, Cleveland has, with Watson in the past, has had trouble moving the football and has had interceptions and things like that. But I think you combine the fact that their defense is for real. I think that they're built around that defense now. I think that they keep Watson contained, even if he does play, to plays that are not particularly risky for them. So, difficult has a great point. Deshaun wearing a sleeve and a harness on his right arm and shoulder, could barely throw the ball when his shoulder was 100%. So again, I think that there's obviously we're not assuming Watson at full strength. But I think there is a good question that Difficult brings up, which is, do you assume that he is at strength at all, or is this for show? And a couple weeks ago when I did the show, the betting community was correct about it, which was that he wasn't going to play, whereas all the media was kind of asleep at the wheel. I think that is something to consider here as well. Is this for show, or is this for something more substantial, which means he'll play, which we did see in the case of Derek Carr and his AC joint injury just a couple weeks ago, is probably the worst thing for a team that, in the case of the Saints, has a better backup quarterback than the Browns. But in both cases, the quarterback was particularly poor when he did play injured. So looking at, I don't really want to talk about this game too much. Las Vegas going to Chicago. We're seeing a Brian Hoyer revenge game, -2.5 in Chicago. Tyson Bagent is going to start now. I'm a big fan of Division II football players because I was one way back in the day. So obviously I want to monitor this, but the Raiders are in like a real have a real chance to go 4-3 here and put some add some probability to their playoff odds. Brian Hoyer, he hasn't won a start since 2018. So that's something to, I think, consider. That is, I would start Aiden O'Connell if I were the Raiders, and maybe they'll give him some play time. Devontae Adams came out this week and was pretty upset about his lack of targets. Jacoby Myers has been the preferred receiver of Jimmy Garoppolo oftentimes in that offense, which is, I think Jacoby Myers is a good receiver, but I think that is, obviously a waste of their resources. Given how poor the Chicago Bears defense is, and particularly the secondary, I do think you'll see some stuff to Adams this week. So just look at those player props to determine whether or not those are of value to you. But I think that the Raiders, go on the road here, take care of Chicago. There is even a question as to whether or not Chicago is trying to win, but there are reports that both sides of the regime are in danger here. The Bears have never fired a head coach during the middle of the season, but there are reports that changes are not necessarily it's not a lock that they're going to make it to 2024. I'll just say that. This one's interesting. I know Josiah Clark, my friend who also does some Hammer stuff, he wrote about this one. Washington going to New York. Depending upon where you look, you can get this at an expensive 2.5 for Washington, or a flat 3 for New York. Total on this game in the 37.5. This one's weird. I did a lot of Washington radio this week. My friend Kevin Sheehan asked me to come on the show. I thought nothing of it. And I just made an offhand comment that I thought that Sam Howell was going to be a very good backup quarterback in the NFL. And of course, that because he's currently the starter for Washington, that generated a decent amount of buzz. And, I think if you add it up, there's a very, and Sean Donahoe, very good point here. Gen Z Fitzpatrick. Now, Fitzpatrick was a starter, got a starter contract for a while, but for the most part was a backup during the second half of his time in the NFL. But when I look at this, Sam Howell, when you look at, setting the league record for sacks taken in a season, breaking the mark of David Carr, the brother of Derek Carr, who, obviously was not much for this league as far as a starting quarterback. When I look at, they're in the bottom third of the league in EPA per play, even though depending upon where you look at grades, PFF's probably about 8. ESPN is in that 11 to 13 range, and SIS is in that 11 to 13 range as well. Like, Washington's offensive line is not great, but relative to the rest of the league where offensive line play has not been particularly good, they're just fine. And yet they're still dealing with a lot of pressure, dealing with a lot of sacks. A lot of that is on Howell. We've seen other quarterbacks, Randall Cunningham, who did have the sack record before Carr, emerge and have decent careers despite high sack rates, even in Hall of Fame seasons. But Randall Cunningham offenses were never really particularly consistently good either. And that's something that, in his legend, not that many people, come to face. Very inconsistent. Randall Cunningham was benched for ineffective play in 1994 for Bubby Brister, for 1995 for Rodney Peete, and in 1999 for Jeff George. There are issues. And Cunningham, I speak about the second half of his career for a point. Like, when you have that superior athleticism, you can get away with some of those things. And then when Randall Cunningham, lost that superior athleticism near the end, right? He had a broken leg in 1993, a torn ACL in 1991. Once he got past those injuries and he didn't have the superior athleticism to build off of, then his offense was far less effective unless he had the Randy Moss, Chris Carter offense the one year in Minnesota. So when I think about Sam Howell, I just don't see a long-term starter in the NFL. And Beat Gamer, or sorry, I think it's difficult here. That's a good point. Heineke sucks too, but they should start him. Pointless team either way, I guess. Like, I think that's the point, right? I think that if you were trying to win these games and make the playoffs, if it meant a lot to you to do that, then I think Heineke would probably be your chance. I think you'd buy the tail with Heineke. And I think in some ways they are buying a tail with Howell as well. If you catch a game where you face a defense that can't get to the quarterback, I do think he's a good enough thrower to make plays, but they face teams that can't get to the quarterback, and they've still given up a lot of sacks in, for example, Chicago. So I just don't know if there's a way out there. And a lot of Washington fans are upset. I think a lot of, our life we've been told, touchdown interception ratio, passer rating, none of those things involve sacks. Joseph Hefner does a good job, I think, for Kansas City Sports Network, displayed what we've known for a long time, which is sacks on average give up about 2 points to a defense. And, even though he's not throwing a ton of interceptions, every single, every 2.5 sacks or so is the equivalent of an interception to a defense. So Howell is throwing a lot. It's just sort of in an indirect way. Mass is a good point here. How fixable is a QB that takes so many sacks? It is one of the more stable traits in all of football. So, not to say that he can't improve or he won't, but it's something that happened to him in college. It's something that happened to him so far in the NFL, and it's, I think, going to be hard to shake. With respect to this game and handicapping it, I think I make the game too. So, I mean, at +3, even with Tyrod Taylor, I think that there's probably some value on the Giants. But if you don't want to watch or have any investment in that game, I cannot blame you. The Giants are really tough to watch, even though they were competitive the other day. This is a good point. If Kyler becomes available, he's a good fit in Washington, in my opinion. Yeah, there's going to have to be some sort of moving of the money because, he's got a 35 million-ish guaranteed paragraph 5 next year. And so that actually goes with the trading team, which is great. But that also means that trade would have to be like Osweilerian in the sense of, a team, the Cardinals might have to take a pick and ship it with Kyler Murray to get that off the books, which is why I think that they are, given that they're not a lock to be the first pick. I do still think they will get the first pick, but since they're not a lock to be the first pick right now, I think that is why they're entertaining playing him, because there are some financial benefits to doing so. Good question by Fraser Lamont. Is Tyrod Taylor a better quarterback than Daniel Jones? I think he might be. I mean, Tyrod has some good traits. He doesn't take a lot of sacks, but at the same time, he sells the tail like basically every single play, meaning he doesn't, you don't see big play chances with him. And I think even worse is that you don't see a lot of intermediate stuff. He will, like against the Bills, he threw the deep ball. It wasn't particularly effective. But what you don't see with him is the 10 to 19 stuff, the really valuable stuff that you really want a quarterback who's kind of in that middle tier. You want to be able to run play action and have him rip middle of the field plays that are pretty valuable in the NFL. And I just haven't seen Tyrod Taylor do that consistently. I think he's a good backup. I think he's very much the quarterback you saw on Sunday night, which is like, you put him in there, even against a good team, he's not going to embarrass you. You're not going to, you're not going to not be able to evaluate the other players on your team because he's so bad. But I don't think he can go out there. He's a complete opposite of Heineke. I think Heineke can win you games that you're not supposed to win. He can also lose you a game when you're a favorite, even if your backup is starting. I think Tyrod is not going to lose that many games where if for whatever reason he's starting for your starter and you're a favorite, I think he wins most of those games. But I also don't think he can actually win many games when he's an underdog, which is just, it depends upon where you are in your development cycle as a team as to whether or not you want that to be your quarterback. Moving on here. This one's interesting. Atlanta going to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay favored by 2.5. I don't really have this is one where whoever wins this game is in first place in this division, crazily, right? So Atlanta's got the easiest schedule in the NFL moving forward. Tampa Bay is 3-2 right now after being kind of beaten up pretty badly by Detroit, although they did have opportunities in that game and Mayfield wasn't particularly good. This is if you're a teaser player, this is a perfect teaser leg, although again, as difficult will probably tell you, there's not a ton of really good opportunities for teasers anymore. And in fact, I'm on the I'm on the side of like it's actually kind of hard to play one now, just because if you like a play well enough for a leg to be plus EV at the prices you're getting now in teasers, you might just like the leg overall after giving up those six points. You really do have to, though there are some places, there are some PPHs that'll give you -110, but it's increasingly hard, I think, for those easy plays to stick around. But I do think that game will be close. I think as I wrote about at sumersports.com this week, I think that game will be a privilege for all that get to watch it. And I don't think it's going to be one of the games that's on my television. I'll just say that much this week. This one will be, though. Detroit going to Baltimore, 3-point underdogs. It's been about that all week. You can get in some places a cheap 3 on Baltimore. A lot of my friends who are better bettors than or better handicappers than me, they like the Ravens, and I can understand why. The Ravens are very good at the coverages that Jared Goff struggles at, which are kind of like the even coverages, the 4s and the 6s of the world. I recognize that. I also think that, not having David Montgomery, as much as running backs don't matter that much, I think hurts them a little bit, because they don't have somebody between the tackles that can kind of exploit some of the edges they might have on the offensive and defensive line. And then defensively, I think Detroit gave some things to Tampa Bay last week that they just didn't take advantage of. Godwin was open in the end zone a few times, and Baker missed them, and they moved the ball okay. That being said, now Beat Gamer brings up a good point. He says Detroit's overvalued. I think any team that's 5-1 is going to be, in this case, and especially, it's weird. It's like this concoction of things. They're 5-1, but the last 4 wins that they've had have all been by multiple scores. They've all been pretty impressive, and they haven't beaten any good quarterbacks, Ritter, Baker, Love. I will say that, but here's the thing I'll say about the Ravens, and I have a lot of affection for the Ravens. I'm friends with a few people who are on that team, and I like I said, I think very highly of the organization. The Ravens do fewer of the things that make me want to buy into them week in and week out, meaning there's a lot more punts on 4th and 1. There's a lot more field goals in kind of deeper areas. There's returns on kickoffs when we know that returns on kickoffs are stupid. There's just a lot of things that they do where I used to be able to be pretty positive that the Ravens would do the right thing in a lot of situations in game, and I'm not as positive about that anymore. Turn that around, and I know Dan Campbell comes off as a meathead, but I'm far more positive on Dan Campbell in terms of doing the right thing in game, like kind of going for the right 4th downs, like taking the right chances. I'm much more positive on them doing the right thing than I am on the Ravens side. So weather in this game shouldn't be too bad. I think that there were some questions early in the week as to what kind of weather we were going to get. I think we're going to luck out here as far as getting to see both these teams play in good weather situations. And so I think that does actually favor the Ravens a little bit. We had 16-mile-per-hour winds, which I think could affect things 14 mile per hour by the time you get to about 1 o'clock. So that could be, something that does affect it could affect the total, for example. That could affect how sloggy the game is. But, if Baltimore plays the game that they're supposed to, and I think that the game that they have been accustomed to playing over the past 6 or 7 years, I think they win this game, and I think that they're a good value to cover. I think, given what I've seen over the past year or so, like, I'm not that convinced. So, I think it's Detroit or nothing, actually, given what I've seen so far this year, which I know goes against some very, very smart people. Okay, moving on to the 4 o'clock hour. This is one, Seattle laying 7.5, 8 against Arizona. I was on Gil Alexander's show a couple weeks ago with the star of the action documentary, Todd Winshev, and everybody there was talking about how plucky the Arizona Cardinals were, and I certainly agree. I certainly agree, but I think that the Arizona Cardinals still want to pick first. And over the past couple weeks, and I said that then, and I think at the time, the Bears hadn't won a game, and Denver looked horrendous, and all these kind of things, and now I think that it's starting to come back. Now, Seattle was not great against Cincinnati on Sunday, but they moved the ball well. They just didn't convert in the red zone, which is not completely noise, but it's more noise than the within game stuff. And, so I don't particularly see an issue with Seattle moving the football in this game. I also think that they'll do some stuff like blitz Devon Witherspoon off the corner and pressure the quarterback that will make Josh Dobbs feel a lot more like Daniel Jones than he has been in some of these games. So this is one where I think Seattle wins big and gets back on the winning track here. I think Arizona's proven their point to me. They have a good coach, in my opinion. I think they're moving in the right direction. And now to me is the time for them to get the first overall pick. That's kind of how I see this one. Interesting question by Roy here. Eric, do you adjust team rank players returning from injury? Example, Ramsey and Achane for Miami. Yeah, you have to. I mean, the players matter. Players are exactly what they're supposed to be. Players, I mean, there are two sort of approaches, right, to handicapping. One is the top-down method and one is the bottom-up method. Like, both of them have their appeals. But I think anybody now has to do some sort of player level stuff if they want to talk about, if they want to spin narratives on games. Difficult says, Kyler's going to play in a couple weeks. I agree with that. I don't know how much of that Arizona team is going to be left for him to play with by the time they get back. I know Buddha is going to come off of IR. I know Hollywood Brown, but Hollywood Brown has been a very inconsistent player from the perspective of staying healthy. So I do, though, think that by the time he comes in there, I think that they'll be competitive, but I don't know if they'll win enough games to still avoid getting the number one pick. But that is a good point. This is not a tank in the same way. I think this is a more elegant tank than some that we've seen in the past, for sure. Okay. Ugly game, Pittsburgh at Los Angeles. This thing is 3.5, depending upon where you look. Pittsburgh coming off of a bye. Kenny Pickett getting a little bit healthier. They do not get Pat Freiermuth back as he aggravated a hamstring injury in practice. Stafford has been very good this year, especially like if you look at my old employer, the PFF, the big time throws, they're there. Puka Nacua has given way a little bit to Cooper Kupp, but they're both being pretty productive. Kupp has been amazing since returning from injury. The Steelers, this feels like the kind of game that they win for no reason. So it's tough for me to think about laying with the Rams here. But I think that this game has a lot of variance. Like, I think Stafford could make enough big plays where Pittsburgh could never come back because they simply are down too many points. And we've seen that game a bunch of times in the Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, end of Ben Roethlisberger era. And difficult gives this one out. I'm on Pitt, guys. Like, again, and this is the other reason. Stafford is been playing really good football, but when it comes to avoiding the negative plays, once these games have gotten tight, he has made negative plays. And you think about that offensive line, you think about, Watt, Highsmith, and I know they're missing Hayward, but they do have, the ability to get Stafford off of his point and throwing the ball to the secondary. And I think that is the way that I think is going to be tough for them. It's going to be tough for Stafford to avoid making the big play that Pittsburgh uses to win every single game. So that's my handicap on the game. I think, if you can get yourself one of the Stafford interception props, I think you have to, at least explore that as a play. The over, if you look at most books, is -145. Actually, I think that's pretty fair. So if you want to take an over on Stafford interceptions, you might want to look to a place that has a implied 50-50, like underdog or something, if that's legal for you. Because I do think that there's going to be a turnover in this game, and that's really the way that Pittsburgh, ends up making this their game. They also are without any kind of NFL caliber running back right now, which, given the state of their offensive line, is a problem. Again, not to be somebody who's a big time running backs matter person, but I do think that has some impact on this game. Okay, let me go to this next game, which will be Green Bay versus Denver. Actually, I do have to tell my boss Thomas that I'm on the podcast. He's just called me. So yeah, we go Green Bay at Denver. Green Bay actually now is laying a point to 2 points, depending upon where you go. I don't really have an opinion on this game. I think that if Jordan Love, Aaron Jones, Christian Watson can't get it going against this Denver defense, I think that that's going to bear some tough some tough sledding for the rest of the season. Like that, to me, this is a test of the viability of the Green Bay Packers on offense. Defensively, I think that they're probably going to give up some stuff to the McLaughlin and the Javonte Williams of the world. But I think offensively they should be good enough to move the ball, and I do think they should be favored in this one. I think the total 45 is about where it should be in this game. Not really much else to say about this one. The last game of the Sunday afternoon slate, Kansas City hosting the LA Chargers. This was 6.5 on the look ahead. It's now 5.5. Kansas City was not all that impressive against Denver, but the Chargers were also the Chargers against the Cowboys. These two teams always do play tight, though. I think, the one difference this year is that Kansas City's defense is quite a bit better than it has been the past few years. And Sean, saw me slip up. It is the San Diego Chargers until they win that division. And Derwin might be out, which is another big one as well. And Kansas City's defense is better than previous meetings. Yeah, I do think that that's all, those are all good points. I think that if you believe all those things, I think Kansas City ATS is a good bet. If it gets out to 6.5, Kansas City on a teaser, to me, again, my statements about teasers notwithstanding, could be something worth doing. The other thing is Mike Williams is out here for the Chargers, which has always been the player that has killed Kansas City in the past. And as Difficult says, Amenahu is returning, and him with Chris Jones will be pretty good. I think Amenahu will set a good edge in the run game on early downs, and then he'll kick inside. And one thing that Chris Jones has been fantastic at the past 2 years, which is pass rushing from the edge. When they tried to play him full-time at the edge, he was a disaster in the run game. But when they pass rush him on 3rd and 4th and longs from the edge, it is truly a good pass rush. And we've seen good play from Michael Dana, George Karlaftis. I think Amenahu slides in there and makes that even better. So put less pressure on Felix Anaduke-Uzama and company to mature in that way. So this should be an interesting game. I do think that with 10 days off, I do think getting McCole Hardman back, I do think adding more Rashee Rice should help the wide receiver group in Kansas City here. So to me, it's Chiefs or nothing, but it's always tough laying points with the Chiefs above a field goal, because when it gets end of game, it's an odd situation. There is this. There is the fact that in-game decision making and just overall like penalties and things like that for the Chargers this year have really held them back. So Sunday Night Football, Miami against Philadelphia. Let's go ahead and pull up the figure here from Sumer Sports on Twitter. And just look at the beauty that is this game. Now, I think one thing to think about here, now this was tweeted out by Tage Seth, is how good Miami has been. Like, you're talking about first percentile, but how like relatively meager relative to expectations that Philadelphia has been. The offense has not been as good as we've expected it to. And yet, Philly here is favored by 2.5. I think professionals have grabbed 3 every time that they've seen it with Miami, but there have been some people who have bet Philly out to that 3 on numerous occasions here. I think the reason for that is that Miami has not seen a pass rush with the kind of oomph that the Philadelphia Eagles have. I do think the Eagles have advantages on both sides of the offensive and defensive line. And so if they can rattle Tua and Devontae Smith plays, I think that the Eagles, I understand why they're out to 3. That being said, anything beyond that to me is too much for the Eagles and would be a thought for the Dolphins. Both teams do a pretty good job on 4th down decisions, and there have been some hiccups from Sirianni this year, but for the most part, I think you'll see a clean game as far as that's concerned. You won't have any messages from Difficult saying the Eagles or the Dolphins are unserious. I think that both teams are very serious about winning, and I'm just looking forward to that game from an entertainment standpoint. Monday night, you have Vikings hosting San Francisco. This is interesting because, good question by Sean. This is actually a teaser. I would say do not play. Total is too high. Teasers are not as valuable as before, unless you can get like a -110, which is probably not available really anywhere except for PPHs. And yeah, so I wouldn't mess around with that. So interestingly, I looked this up. The Vikings since 2018, so since they've had Kirk Cousins, have not been underdogs by more than 7.5 points in any game he started. And at home, they've never been more than 3.5-point underdogs in any game that he has started. So this game, they're 7 or so, 6.5, depending on where you look, 7.5 on the look ahead. This is as bad as the Vikings have been in a home game, pre-game, since the Kirk Cousins era started. And it makes sense. Cousins, since he showed up, injuries aside, has really never had somebody, he's never had this lack of receiving talent. He always had Diggs and or Thielen. He always had Jefferson with Thielen, and now Jefferson with Addison. Like, this is really a punchless Vikings weaponry, especially given how poorly Hawkinson's played at holding onto the ball, how kind of huff Alexander Mattison has been. I think the Niners feast on the Vikings this week. I just don't see. I think defensively they can do some things to kind of mess with Brock Purdy. I think Flores has done a much better job than that talent gives rise to, especially against bad teams. Now this is a unproven quarterback, but this is also a very good offense. So I think the question is if you're handicapping this game and you want to take Minnesota, do you think about this as being a situation where Flores is feasting on a young quarterback, or he's going up against a great offense? I think if he's going up against a great offense, their lack of ability, not having Marcus Davenport again, not really having any like viable corners and things like that, does that hurt them? I think that's going to hurt them more than being able to confuse Brock Purdy will help the Vikings. So to me, I think 7.5 on the look ahead was way too much, but I think now as it's traveling beneath a touchdown and given all the injuries that the Vikings have, I think that there is some value on the Niners. Okay, that's like all the games. I know we had a really good chat. We've had some we've had some like pretty good discussion here. I think on Monday, Thomas and I are going to review the games. On Wednesday, we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to scout this time of year, the Caleb Williams phenomenon. How much is Caleb Williams' poor play against Notre Dame being taken into consideration, et cetera, et cetera. We have one more comment here on that Minnesota to San Francisco. Isn't one I see giving Purdy many issues. I agree. But, Purdy is a young quarterback still, and Flores has done good against young quarterbacks. So, cool. That's it for me. Like I said, we got pretty lively chat here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, give a review on iTunes. But until next week, it's been Eric Eager. This has been the Sumer Sports Show. Have a great weekend. Good luck, everybody.